Right, hello, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I want to demonstrate how I build firmware on my keyboard layouts based on QMK. So typically, if you were to Google QMK, typically you have to install the toolchain. You can use the configurator if you're using Windows or Mac. But if you want to build firmware from scratch, you have to go through this tutorial, set up your environment, install a bunch of tools, and I just can't be bothered with it. So I'm going to show you something a little different. So I've prepared this repository for a project called Vial configs. Vial is it's a variant of QMK that behaves like Via. Again, called Vial QMK. That allows you to configure the board kind of live as it's through a configurator that runs in the browser or as a desktop application without reflashing the software. It behaves similar way to Via, which is very popular in the keyboard building community. Some people have an issue with it because it's not entirely open source. It might be now, I don't know. But ever since the controversies has started, I just didn't bother using it. And I use Vial because it's a fully open source project and it is what it is. Currently in beta version, it has been on this version for a while, but essentially it's an offshoot of QMK. It's based on the same source code. It's kind of lags a little bit behind QMK in terms of features, but it's mostly there. But this idea that I've come up with, it applies to QMK as well. You could do exactly the same because the structure of the folders is exactly the same. So to get started, you would create your folder structure. So the way QMK works is that you go by the board name. So in this example, I'm demonstrating the Ferris keyboard. The variant is sweep, and under that, the name, the final folder name is the name of your key map. So typically, it will be your GitHub username or some other name that will be unique to the folder. So that's my example here: Ferris, sweep, no tutorial, and in there you've got a config. Which in this case I tend to use the RPi 2040 based microcontrollers. So this is what I've got here, but the config is not important. You've got your key map, which is the basic key map that gets flashed with QMK. You've got your rules. I don't know why this is bothering me. And you've got your Vial JSON, which is just something that comes from the Vial repository. Another thing I have here as well, I've got this vial config.vil, which is essentially a JSON file that is a dump of my latest configuration that I've saved onto the keyboard that I dump using the Vial GUI interface. But that's for this purpose is not important. It's just I like to, when I flash a new keyboard, I can just load this file from Vial and I'll get exactly the layout that I've configured, because not everything is configured the same way as in this file. But I digress, it's not important. So in the README, what you would typically do, if you've got a toolchain install, you can flash it locally with these commands. So you will have your firmware files, you pick you got your QMK utility, you flash. Let me just hide this sidebar. Hide this. You've got your keyboard variant. KM is key map. So in this case, you folder name. Bootloader, you have split left and right. So that sets the left and right orientation of the split keyboard. And in this case, I'm converting the output to KB2040 microcontroller, which is the RPi 2040 based keyboard controller. But that's not important. That's how you would flash it locally. But I'm not talking about flashing them. You can also use the QMK configurator application for that. This is just a simple X file that comes out of it. So what I've done, the structure is you got your folder for your keyboard as if you had it in QMK. I've got this build local sh file that essentially clears out any hex or UF2 files. UF2 files are for output 2040 controllers. Hex files are for things like LHC, the at Mega based microcontrollers. I'm checking that the QMK is installed. I'm checking out the latest repository for Vial. If it's not installed, I check it out, I clone it. If it is installed, I just pull it, so integrate the latest changes. Then I copy. I'm actually not copying. I'm checking that the keyboard doesn't exist doesn't exist in the QMK kind of repository. Then I'm symlinking. I'm doing a symlink from this local folder to the appropriate location in QMK repository, and the keyboard's first sweep key maps, and that's where my folder goes. Okay, so that when I execute these commands, QMK compile, the right files will be in the right places. And finally, I compile, and then I copy the folders from the build directory out to the kind of root directory of the script. And README files just shows you how to flash it, and this is where I think this solution shines, because I created a GitHub workflow which will use GitHub Actions, and hopefully I'll demo it. I'll push in a minute to this repository. That should trigger a workflow. So what this is going to do, on push for these paths, so Ferris, it's going to use a Ubuntu latest image and with a container for QMK firmware, which is a pre-made container that has QMK and QMK CLI installed. On the main branch, I'm checking out, so the first job is I'm checking out the Vial QMK repository. This could be a straight up QMK repository, it doesn't matter. Recursive with the submodules, there's a bunch of submodules in the QMK and Vial QMK repository that need to be checked out as well, to this path, Vial QMK. Now I copy the key maps to relevant directories. So I actually recursively copy from my branch, first sweep tutorial, to the appropriate location in QMK. I then verify that the Vial UID is unique using the script. This just something specific to Vial, but you could omit this step if you were just compiling QMK. Then I build the firmware, I go into the directory, I compile it with the same commands, and then I save the firmware files as artifacts. So then I can download it as a zip file and flash the keyboard. So if I do that, right now, ignore this Git history, I just deleted the keyboard I'll no longer use. So I'll just say added a GitHub workflow. Okay, so then I do push, and hopefully that will trigger a commit here, and we should have an action. So do we have actions? Yeah, okay, add a GitHub workflow. If we go to this build command, we should see everything does. So setting up a container. And the good thing about it is that all you need to do, let's say if you're on a Mac or Windows, if I do QMK, again, QMK firmware, get started, QMK configurator, I could just download this utility, flashing utility from QMK. If you're Mac or Windows, this is called QMK Toolbox actually. I've got a link to that in the description below. And the latest release is this one. You've got assets for Windows, and I believe there's a application for Mac somewhere. Maybe this one, QMK Toolbox package. I might have to install it. And this way you could just pick up the firmware files and flash them this way without installing any drivers, etc. So this simplifies things a little bit. So it's compiling, so it's checking out the in this case Vial QMK repository. It's going to copy the relevant directories for the key map, and it should just build, and at the end should have a zip file that we can just download. It has all the firmware files. So in this case, I'm compiling for Raspberry Pi based microcontrollers as well as Atmega microcontrollers like Elite-C, for example. So you have hex files and you have UF2 files. So there's some warnings, you can ignore those. As long as it compiles, it doesn't really matter. So it's building firmware. That step is normally typically the longest. Just collapse these. So that building firmware, and we should have, here you go, post checkout, stopping containers. So it's compiled everything, saved firmware files, and at the end we should have, oh, I don't want to do that. If I do reload, we have artifacts somewhere, complete job. So go to actions. Where are my artifacts? Got this one, yeah, okay. So went to the workflow, and in there we've got firmware files. So you can download those. Save them downloads, fine. And let's go watch this here. Downloads. We've got the firmware files. I've unzipped that, and we've got the UF2 file, and we've got the hex file. So everything's compiled, and you can just pick up those files and flash them directly onto the keyboard. Okay, so this is essentially it. It's not very complicated at all. You've got the code is here. You can check it out. You can clone it. You can fork it. It's a public repository, and yeah, I think this is probably the easiest way to build your firmware. And again, if you wanted to make a change, you open the appropriate file, say key map, and change something here, and change the rules or whatever this is, the config file. You can change that, and it should just pick it up and build it for you with no problems. And that's how I typically maintain my key map for QMK or Vial QMK. I don't bother installing the toolchain. I just get the files from GitHub when they build and flash them using QMK utility or the QMK toolbox. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video useful, consider leaving a thumbs up, leave a comment if you've got any questions. I'll try to answer if I can, and consider subscribing if you found this useful and you want to see more. Cheers.